never know the exact second. So sometimes there's a. Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. I met today's guest on a summit that we were both featured in. It was actually the Kick Sugar Summit. Her name is Sara Levite. She is a health coach, she's a psychotherapist, and she has been sugar and flour free for over 32 years. Here it is, 2 days after Thanksgiving. I bet a lot of people haven't been sugar and flour free for even 2 days. I myself have only been abstinent of sugar for about 18 years and flour for about 10. So I'm really impressed, and I can't wait to hear her story, because if you know anything about me, I believe that abstinence is bliss, and it's way easier than moderation. Please welcome Sara to the show. I cannot wait to hear this story.
Oh, well, it's great to be here too. And it also feels like a blessing to be able to have lived the 32 years without sugar and flour, because as you know, those are two very highly addictive, potentially addictive substances. And I just feel like a combination of things came to align, and I feel very, very fortunate.
I love that you say they're potentially addictive substances, because there's some people that can drink alcohol and not become an alcoholic. But if you're an alcoholic, it's not you. And there are probably some people like my husband who can eat sugar and flour in varying amounts and not become overweight, sick, or addictive. But if you are, it's not you. And I'm so inspired, because to me, abstinence next to God and family is like, it's like the greatest gift to me. And it's like, I love it. And so many people fight it. Like it's such a, I think, I mean, not everybody can do it, but I got to tell you, the ones that us that can do it, we're so happy.
Well, I classify it under the category of self-care, because once you determine that something doesn't work for you, it's pretty much incumbent upon you to find a way to stray away from it. And obviously that's easier said than done. But I think of my abstinence as being a really, really high priority around the self-care regime, if you will. And so I don't see it as being like I'm being deprived of anything. I don't view it as being a hardship. I view it as being something that I've been really fortunate to experience, and it's just my lifestyle.
And aren't you proud of it though? Like, don't you feel proud? Because I feel proud that like you say, it's not hard. Because if every single day was hard, maybe like at the beginning it was, then we wouldn't be able to do it, right?
I think the word proud, I would replace it with grateful. And the reason why even during the times that were really, really dark, it led me to a place where I was able to practice abstinence, which in turn created really good wellness and health. It also, I lost 40 pounds as a result of going off of those substances. And I get sick very seldom. And so it was all part of a process. It was meant to be.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, because look, they're not the healthiest foods, sugar and flour. They're highly processed foods. They don't have vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals, antioxidants, micronutrients. They don't have fiber and water, and they're calorically dense. So even if somebody doesn't struggle with the addictive piece, if they're struggling with weight, you give them up and, the weight kind of falls off unless you're eating other crap, but that's another story.
Well, and the other thing is that and you and I agree on this, is so much of the food that people eat isn't real food. And so if it's been created in some kind of a lab and in a manufacturing property, then it's not necessarily real food. And so what I do is I just stick with what comes from Mother Nature. And I know I'm okay. I know that I'm fine. And, there are some people who feel like that would be too rigid or restrictive. I feel like it's freedom, because it enables me not to be caught up in the insanity of the addiction.
Exactly. I love that. The insanity of the addiction. I love the way you're phrasing that. But 32 years ago, let's see, I would have been 30. And I knew I had a problem with sugar and I was struggling. I don't know if I really thought of it as addictive, or at least maybe sugar, but not yet flour. How did you learn this in basically 1990?
Right. Well, what happened, I know the exact date. It was May 21st, 1989. And it was the last time that I consumed sugar or flour. And I knew that my life was insane, and I knew that my life was out of control with food when I ate certain substances. And that happened to be sugar and flour. And for me, I was really lucky because I chanced upon a support group of like-minded people who struggled with food, and people who found that the only way for them to not struggle is to support one another in staying away from those substances entirely. Because whether it's physical or psychological, once you consumed it, you couldn't stop. At least that was the mainstay of the group that I was involved in. And, the opposite of addiction is connection. And so I'm constantly encouraging people who are trying to find this path to locate like-minded people that can support you so that you don't feel like you're being judged, and that reduces the amount that you judge yourself. And then in turn, you can move and make the transition and the shift with a lot of security and comfort.
It's interesting because most people know that sugar is not a health food, whether they eat it or not. But flour, bread, the staff of life, we break bread. And it wasn't really until I read Joan Iflin's book, which was maybe, I don't know, like 11 years ago, Sugars and Flours, How They Make Us Crazy, Sick, and Fat, that I realized that any powdered white substance, whether it's salt or sugar or flour or cocaine or rat poison, is probably not something we want to be eating.
Also, you and I both know this, but the food industry discovered that if you combine sugar, salt, and flour together, you create a concoction that is very difficult to abstain from. And again, there are lots of people who can eat these products, who can eat whatever they want, and they stop at a bite, they stop at one, whatever. That's just not me. And so in turn, what I did by having this compulsive binge eating challenge, what that did is it encouraged me to remove those foods, and then my addiction just went dormant. It went completely dormant. And I don't miss those foods at all. I don't feel like when I go to a buffet and, I go to an elaborate restaurant or whatever where there's a buffet with all sorts of desserts and whatnot, I look at those as being drugs for me. They're not even an option. I'm not interested. I'm really not interested. And you referenced before, what was it like in the beginning and how was it difficult in the beginning? In the beginning, it was challenging. But like I said, I had the support of this group of people, which I think is imperative. It's really important. I also had a hugely supportive spouse. And, when people are living with people who support their path toward wellness, it makes it so much easier. So that was helpful. And probably for about 6 months, I asked that we not have any of the junk in the house, and he complied. He was absolutely fine with that. And that helped. And then, but after about 6 months, I could make anything for him. I could make all the baked goods, and it just didn't call to me anymore. And so this substance, once you get it out of your system, it's like you don't crave it, you don't need it. And especially if you have supportive people around you, then you get your emotional needs met elsewhere. So you don't have to use the food for that. And one of the things, as a psychotherapist, I'm constantly trying to help, and a wellness coach, I'm constantly trying to help people to decipher between what is physical hunger and what's emotional hunger. Because those two things get really conflated often. And I think that can put people down a rabbit hole of confusion. And so often people, you walk by a store, you get stimulated by a smell, or you arrive at a buffet, and all of a sudden you think that you're famished, hungry, but you might not be. It might just be that your appetite has been triggered, and all of a sudden you feel this need to consume and consume. Again, that's fine for lots of people. I'm sure that over Thanksgiving, there were many people who overate and many people that didn't have a problem with it. For me, it created a tremendous amount of shame and hardship. So I want to just tell you a little bit about my story. I grew up in a home where there was lots of great food. My mom cooked everything from scratch. There was an abundance of it. Grew up in a Jewish household where food was analogous to pleasure and joy. And so I always had access to good food. I was very fortunate that way. And food was fun. It was joyous. It was celebratory. It was, a big part of any celebration that we had. And then all of a sudden, when I was 19, so that would be 1979, that was the first time in my life that I experienced eating because of emotional pain. And I remember I was feeling depressed.
Sorry about that. Don't you hate when music just random? That's funny because it was almost like the music was adding, like highlighting your story.
Highlighting it. And so I remember I was feeling depressed, and I went to the store and I got a bunch of food, junky food, and I went home and I hid myself away alone, and I ate it. And that was the first time that I remember consciously using food to numb some painful feelings. And therein started a streak that lasted for 10 years. So from when I was 19 to 29, I was binging a lot, and then I would intermittently binge and then fast. It was insane. It was insane. And I found that it took away it took away so much of my energy that I could put toward other things. It was very hellish. I would describe it as being hellish. And then on May 21st, 1989, I was 9 months pregnant. I was just about to have my first son. And I had overeaten and consumed a bunch of sugar. And all of a sudden, I started to feel like I was going into labor. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, this magical natural event that I am about to experience could be tarnished by the effects of a binge. I was so horrified and just so freaked out. Fortunately, it didn't come that day, but it jogged me. It like shocked me into this place of, that's it. I can't do this anymore. I cannot do this anymore. And that was the last time that I consumed any sugar or flour. My son was born, everything went fine. And then in my second pregnancy, I was completely abstinent through that also. So that's a blessing. That's a gift. I know a lot of women, really struggle with their weight during pregnancy and then afterwards. So I just feel like I got off pretty easy. I had 10 years of hell around food. Like I said, I was 40 pounds overweight. I stole food from people. I drove down streets the wrong way on a one-way street to get to food more quickly. I was insane. I was insane with food. That's how just rampant my addiction was. And so since 1989, May 21st, I haven't had that insanity. And so it's been really, really good.
I know people, until people are abstinent, they don't know how great it could be. Well, first of all, so many things about your story I want to touch on. One, first of all, thank you to your husband for being supportive. So many people I work with, their spouse is a louse. What can I say? They won't even do it as an experiment. Like they won't even give them the gift of abstinence for a couple of weeks to see if it makes a difference. And it's never not made a difference, a clean environment. But I'm curious how you were able to cook that stuff, like when I had treatment for food addiction, I was a pastry chef and they said, you can't keep doing that job. Now, maybe because it was early in my recovery and I could do it now, but I really don't want to do it now because now that I know how deleterious these things are, I honestly don't want to, make them for anybody else.
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, I make everything from scratch. So when I make something for somebody, it's the best quality ingredients that I can. I also feel as though there are many people who can consume sugar products and flour products that derive great pleasure from it and that don't seem to have any physical repercussions. And so for them, it's a joy that I want to bestow upon them. So I'm happy to make those things. Like I said, the first 6 months, I refrained from cooking and baking things that I didn't want to be eating, but then I just went to town and made it for my husband and was not provoked or stimulated or triggered by the smell or the sight or anything. It just became a non-option for me. I looked at it as being a drug because for me it is a drug, and it was like shooting heroin. I'm not gonna touch it. So that was really helpful. And I've got a couple of things going for me. One of them is that I'm a very organized person. And so I always have, plenty of good food around. That is the kind of food that I want to eat. I go to great lengths to make sure that I have what I need with me when I go anywhere, whether it's a 15-hour flight or whether it's over to somebody's house for dinner or whatever the case may be. Because as I indicated before, it's a major part of my self-care. And, by the time you get to be an adult, it's incumbent upon you to figure out, okay, what do I need to do to take care of myself? How do I parent myself? And this is a major way that I parent myself, just like exercising and getting enough food and whatnot. And I wanted to make a comment about what you said about, my spouse. One of my areas of specialty in my practice is working with couples. And so what I attempt to do when I'm working with somebody that is a food addict that wants to create a clean environment and have that junk in their house is that I will oftentimes speak with the spouse, with my client, and the three of us will talk about what food addiction is, and I'll create some kind of a comparison for the spouse so that they can see, oh, this might be something that you struggle with, but it just happens to be food for your partner. So I'll try to improve the communication around it and really create almost like a mediation, because I think that having the support of people that you're living with is such a tremendous help. And I don't think it's asking too much. I really don't. I mean, people can go out and get whatever they want whenever they want. But if somebody's struggling with a substance and they need to be away from it so that they don't get triggered by it in their home, I think that that's not a big ask, personally.
I agree. I think that a loving family member would support somebody in recovery. And I'm always shocked at how people don't. And I believe it was Dr. Vera Tarman who said it's because they're addicts themselves. Because what other possible explanation? Would they want to be cruel to their wife?
Well, I think that there's another piece too, which is that they literally do not understand. Okay, I've had that instance revealed to me, that they literally don't understand the concept of somebody not being able to control their food. And the other piece is that sometimes people who are food addicts, they give their spouses mixed messages. So they might say something like, honey, I really don't want to eat ice cream anymore. But then, they'll go out and the person might say, well, I'm on vacation, so I'm just going to get some ice cream. So they give mixed messages, not intentionally, but their spouse can be confused. Like, wait a minute, I don't get it. Sometimes you do eat ice cream and now you tell me you don't want to. So I think the more you can educate the spouse, then the more that it takes the pressure off of everybody to try to figure out how they can navigate that difficult dance.
Great. So here's a great question I saw from Mandy. Sara, why do you think it is that people resist abstinence? Is it because they're addicted or because they don't believe it's possible?
Well, first of all, we are surrounded by messages that suggest that those foods that we want to abstain from are part of a natural celebration. So we get bombarded with images from the media about, you can't have a barbecue, s'mores, you can't have a birthday party without a cake. It's just all of those things. So there's we get this messaging that is constant, that attaches certain foods to certain occasions. So that whole wiring needs to get undone. The other thing is that I think that people, they just get overwhelmed with initially what they perceive to be too much work. Like, how do I even do this? And what does that even look like? The other thing is that I think is really important for people to understand is that if you're a food addict, you don't necessarily know what is considered a healthy amount of food. You don't have a strong frame of reference because most people who are food addicted have a history of binging. And so if that's the case, then they don't necessarily know, like, what's a proper portion size? What does that look like? I remember one of the last times that I ate flour, I was caught in this kind of this obsessive cycle where I wanted to make myself some pasta. So I took the water was boiling and I took a handful of the pasta and I put it in the boiling water. And then I kind of panicked, like, oh no, that's too much. So I took some of it out. And then I thought, well, that's not going to be enough. I literally couldn't find the balance between my head and my stomach. And so this is a really, really big, challenging endeavor for people. One of the things that I'm offering up, and I'm also going to offer your viewers a deal on this, is I'm offering up a 4-week course that's going to start in January. And the title of it is, What Am I Really Hungry For? And it's doing a deeper dive into, is it some emotional hunger that I'm trying to satisfy? Is it physical hunger? How do I distinguish between the two things? How do I start to shift my thinking around food? How do I have some kind of peace with food in my body? And so it's going to be a deeper dive into that. And that's going to be a 4-week class that for your listeners, if they sign up before December 1st, they get 50% off. And so that's an option, because I'm trying to create a virtual supportive environment for people who are trying to do this. So I've got a lot of virtual things coming up that can support your audience too. So in terms of her question about, why is abstinence something that people don't do? It's multiple reasons. It could be because they don't know how. It could be because they don't know if it's okay to, that they get messages that would be so extreme or so rigid. And so they have to reframe it toward, this is a gift that I'm giving myself. This is part of my self-care. And it's nobody's business what I eat. And this is just, it's doing a deeper dive into what makes my body feel better. And that can take a long time to figure out also, not just quantity wise, but specific foods. And so, I just feel like it can be something that can be quite daunting.
Absolutely. So, let's define it. What do you consider sugar and what do you consider flour? Because, sugar has over 200 names. So I'll meet people all the time say, oh, I don't eat sugar. I just use agave, which is worse than sugar because it's metabolized in the liver and it's high in fructose. If we understand the work of Dr. Lustig or Dr. Michael Bourne at USC, fructose is much worse, or they'll use all the 0 calorie or low calorie sweeteners. My feeling is sugar, flour is flour. And so people are asking, what do you consider it? Even if it's whole grain, even if it's one ingredient pasta. So where do you stand on that spectrum?
One thing I want to say from the outset is that I don't judge anybody for what they eat. And I don't claim to know that what's best for everybody. I think it's imperative that people understand that there's no one diet that works for everybody, and that there isn't any expert. Your body is your body's expert. There's nobody besides you that's more expert in your body than you. So I want to say that for me, for my body, I don't ingest anything that's not from Mother Earth. I don't eat anything processed. I don't eat. The only sugar that I get is through fruit. I eat fruit. I don't have any sugar substitutes. I don't have honey. I don't have maple syrup. I just don't have anything like that, because either emotionally or physically, I think it would be triggering for me. And I don't miss sweets, because to me, after having this lengthy period of no sugar, 32 years, to me, a mango, a banana, blueberries, those are like so sweet and so delicious. The other thing that happens when you move away from processed food, and I'm sure you experience this too, Chef AJ, is that your taste buds change and they become much more accurate to what's really going on. So, for example, I can have very plain food and be satisfied. I can actually taste what it is. I'll never forget when I did a week-long juice fast at this health center one year. And I remember, all we had obviously for a week was juice. And
Wait, I'm sorry to interrupt. If people are saying your voice, your sound is fluctuating. So I can hear you fine because I turned my sound up, but I don't know if you need to be a little bit close. Your information is so great. I don't want people to miss it. So just maybe either speak a little louder or if you can turn your volume up, we'll be closer to the mic.
No problem, because my volume is up all the way. Can you?
Right. It's perfect now. It's perfect now. And you ended with what you were doing a juice fast, and I'd love to know where you did it, by the way.
This was actually in Western Massachusetts at Kripalu Yoga Center. I did a week-long juice fast, and this was 100 years ago. It was in the 80s. And I was there, and what they do is they transition you after you have the juice fast, they transition you very slowly back to eating solid food. And the first thing that they let us have was steamed broccoli. And if you don't think that was the most delicious broccoli I've ever had, and then when we graduated to a plain baked potato, forget it. It was so good. And this is what happens when people retrain their taste buds, if you will, that plain food very, very different than it does when you're used to eating a lot of processed food.
Absolutely. Here is a comment from Cheryl. My hubby loves me and supports me in my own journey, but he says he lives here too, and he wants to be free to eat whatever he wants in our home because he doesn't believe that refined food addiction is real and that I suffer from this. I can't convince him otherwise, and I may not may never be able to have a clean environment. Now, my psychologist, Dr. Lyle, believes that a clean environment can always be negotiated, but how can she say he supports her if he refuses to give her the gift of a clean environment?
Because support is not black and white. Support, it's on a wide range. And so she may feel like he supports her because he loves her and he wants her to be happy and whatnot, but she also may be feeling some shame and some conflict about asking for it in the first place. So a couple of things that come to my mind is to ask him to do it for 30 days or to ask him to put all of whatever he wants to munch on in the trunk of his car. And so if I'm working with that couple and I were trying to negotiate that for them or with them, I would probably say to him something like, I know that this is very confusing to you, that maybe she even gives you mixed messages sometimes because this is confusing to her. And I also will self-disclose. I'll say, let me tell you from my own experience, because I went through this too, that I know both professionally and personally the severity of this addiction. And so if you could grant her this for 30 days, and I use that word intentionally, grant her this, because I want him to realize that I understand it's generous on his part. What I always try to do when I'm working with a couple is I try to make sure that they both feel like they're being heard. And the husband, if he believes that that's too big of an ask, then what I would do is I would simply say to him, I understand that it feels like some of your freedom is being taken away. However, you could do this for 30 days and just conduct an experiment. I use the word experiment a lot with my clients because to ask somebody to do something, they sometimes have this perception that you're asking them to do it forever, or it just feels like it's going on endless. But if you say it's an experiment, at the end of which you can see how everybody's doing. And I might even say something to the husband with a wink, like, if your wife is happier and she feels better about her health, she may be, more loving and affectionate to you, and that'll make a happier home environment for everybody. So I throw in a little bit of spice that way, and just appeal to him in so that I understand that he feels that this is a big ask, and that she's asking him to do just a mini experiment.
That's how Dr. Lyle would say it too. Absolutely. Yeah. A lot of people are watching live and say they too struggle with sugar addiction. And how do you explain the flour piece? Because a lot of people, listen, I don't think anybody, whether they eat sugar or not, is touting it as a health food, but people cannot understand flour, because it's not sweet. It's just, it's still, it goes through the same refining process of drugs and alcohol, but it's really hard to get people to understand the flour piece, I think.
Well, when I'm working with people and I ask them what they tend to binge on, it's processed food. I've never worked with anybody that said that they binge on carrots or that they binge on apples. I've never, that just hasn't been my experience. What I have experienced is people binging on processed foods, and processed foods almost always include flour and sugar. And so right there, if you eliminate the flour and the sugar from your ingredient list, if you will, you're reducing the number of addictive foods. So there's that. Lots of people, they find that they binge on bread-like products. And psychologically, what that does is it creates this notion that bread is a food that gives them a certain kind of comfort. And if I were a neuroscientist and I could understand the way that these foods impact the brain chemistry, I'm sure that it does do some of that. It probably increases the dopamine and makes people feel better and whatnot. Now, in terms of, we all know those stories about how the French eat baguettes all the time and they don't binge and they're thin. I just feel like our is very different around food. There is so much food. There are many choices. Food is part of every celebration. It's marketed to us quite highly, and so I just look at that, and I know what works for me. I don't miss bread. There's lots of ways of using other substances as a vehicle for whatever it is that you want to put on bread, whether it's peanut butter or whatnot. So bread isn't essential for any of us. It's just educated and understanding what are some alternatives that will enable me to do food that will not have the flour in it.
Yeah. Well, many of the doctors I've had on the show say, if you got to ask if it's okay, you probably know it's not, at least for you.
Right. And also that calls to mind something else too. You know, there's a lot of times when I'm working with people who are struggling with this AJ, they feel this need to get validated or to get outside permission or outside guidance. And what I try to do is I try to work with to do the deeper dive into really understanding what works for their individual body. And that expands to all sorts of things, not just food, but what works for their body exercise wise, what works for their body, even in terms of the activities that they enjoy, the places that they want to go to. So I'm all about, that's where I integrate the wellness coaching with my psychotherapy, is that I'm all about trying to get people connected to their bodies. And whether that's connected to their emotions in their bodies, or the physical sensations, or their health and their wellness. I think that that's imperative. So that's just something that I try to focus on.
Great. Thank you. Let's see. The class that you're doing, that's virtual, right? And how is that delivered? Over Zoom?
Yes, all of my classes are virtual, and anybody can go to my website and click on upcoming events, and that will list all of my classes. As I said, the one that I'm offering in January, entitled "What Am I Really Hungry For?" I'm offering your viewers, if they sign up by December 1st, 50% discount on that. I also wanted to extend another offer to your viewers, which is if they email me, and I believe that you put my email address in the show notes.
I put everything in the show notes.
Okay. So if people want, I'd like to offer them a free gift. And the free gift is my top 25 alternatives to emotional eating. And all they need to do is just email me and I'll send it to them for free.
That is so nice of you. Thank you. Did you go to like an actual program to learn this, 30 years ago? Was the information there back then?
Well, what happened is I was living on a small island at the time, 32 years ago. And what I did is I started ordering books that had anything to do with food addiction or compulsive overeating. I think that's what I would classify it as back then. I didn't really understand food addiction, or I didn't use that terminology. So I ordered these books about compulsive overeating because I knew for sure that I was doing that. And started reading those books and started really feeling like, wow, this is a thing, and there's other people, and I just found great comfort and support. And then I moved off the island and I moved to a place where there were support systems for me, and I availed myself of those support systems. As I indicated before, I think it's imperative that people have a community or a village or a handful of folks that they get together with, because this way, the shame that most people feel who are food addicts or who are compulsive overeaters is so tremendous that there's a tendency to feel just a lot of negativity toward oneself, and the extent to which they can be with other folks who are also experiencing that, and you can all support one another in making the transition away from looking at this as being some kind of a moral issue or a character defect towards something that is not your fault, something that is very treatable, and something that the tribe can support each other in trying to change and recover from.
I have a question. Do you work with people that maybe like where a harm reduction approach is, where they still want to eat sugar and flour, but less of it? And do you find that works?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, everybody's different in terms of tolerance level for change. My personal experience was that when I stopped cold turkey and didn't have it anymore in any quantity, that's what worked for me. I have to respect the fact that not everybody's like me. So what I want to do is I want to help people to distinguish between, is it like the negotiating part of their brain that's the addicted part that's trying to keep the substance in their repertoire, Or is it really that they can eat some of these things moderately? And that's individual from person to person. I don't believe anybody needs processed food. I don't believe anybody needs added sugar. That's just not something that people need in order to survive. However, there are lots of people who the idea of abstaining completely is so overwhelming that they need a different approach. And that's fine. It just isn't the one that worked for me. I tried that for years and years and years and years. I tried that. There were 10 years when I was insane with food, and I think I tried it. I tried, the fasting. I tried, binging, giving myself permission to binge on weekends, but then eat like a bird during the week. I tried, every gimmick and diet there was, really believing in my heart that this was going to be the answer. That I'm going to go on this diet, I'm going to lose a bunch of weight, and then I'm going to be happy. That's just the way my mind was thinking. I didn't realize the way it was tangled up with emotional issues and challenges. I didn't realize at the time that I was self-medicating. I just felt like I was a pig. I couldn't stop eating, that I was a bad person. I felt tremendous shame. I felt like, oh my God, if anybody knew this about me. There were a bunch of years that I just wore big flowy clothes so that people couldn't see how much weight I was gaining. It was hell. It was absolute hell. And I also felt very isolated because it's an isolating situation, because you can't be having an intimate relationship with food and intimate relationships with people at the same time. It just doesn't work that way because you live in a double life. So I had the part of me that was, with people and acting like everything was fine and probably eating like a minimal amount in front of people. And then the minute I was alone, I was binging and making sure that nobody found any remnants of anything. And that's a terrible way to live. It's so isolating and you feel like a fraud. You feel like a fraud.
I know what you mean. Well, but if they weren't addicted, then abstinence wouldn't be hard. Because if we told everybody that they would be at their ideal weight and have no cravings if they just gave up okra, I think they'd be able to do it. But the fact that they can't be abstinent to me shows that there is an addiction.
I know, but first you have to have a whole bunch of education around what is addiction. Because it's socially acceptable, because it's legal, because there's so many memories wrapped into foods from one's childhood. It's really, really hard for people to believe that something can be addictive that way. And so you and I, we're blessed because we're educated around all of this. We've read books, we've talked to people, we've experienced it ourselves. That's a gift. That's a gift that has been given to us. And most people are not necessarily in the place that we are. They don't have the information. And so I like to provide information to people. There's another offering another class coming up. The folks on can read about it on my website under upcoming events. And it's called Weight Loss Without Losing Your Sanity. And it's all about, some of the tips that I've discovered that were really helpful for me around trying to reconcile one's relationship with both food and their body so that they can have more peace and harmony around food. The other thing that I wanted to share is that I think that people also don't realize how much they eat over depression and anxiety. So in my practice, for example, if somebody comes in and they say that they're feeling really anxious, where I bring in my wellness coaching hat is I'll explore with them their lifestyle. Because I've treated people that came in and complained about anxiety only to discover that they were having like 12 cups of coffee a day. And so that's something that a lot of therapists don't necessarily ask, but that's useful information because I'm not going to diagnose them as having some kind of an anxiety disorder if really what it is they're overcaffeinated. And same thing with depression. People who have a binge eating disorder, they oftentimes come in and they are depressed. Why? Because their brains are being so impacted by the foods that they're eating and the shame that they feel and whatnot. So I want to do a deeper dive into what is their lifestyle like so that we can determine, is it the food? Is it the caffeine? What's causing what?
That makes sense. Lisa wants to know, do you take private clients? Do you ever work one-on-one with people?
Yes, I do. I do. And I work virtually, I work live. I work with adults only, but I work with individuals and couples. I've been working with couples for 32 years, and I've been working with individuals for 32 years also.
Wow. You've been doing this as long as you've been abstinent.
Right, exactly. It all just came together at around the same time.
Wonderful.
Um,
Deepak wanted to know, what island did you live on? He lived in Barbados.
Okay, I was living on Nantucket Island off the coast of Massachusetts.
Nice. Do you know who Janine Roth is?
Yes, of course.
She's going to be on the show Monday. So I've been reading her book again, Women, Food, and God. And I wonder, like, in your opinion, Sarah, is food addiction, is emotional eating, is compulsive eating, are they the same or are they different?
Well, there are some people who overeat because they have some kind of psychological issues or emotional challenges that they're dealing with. And they're not necessarily food addicts, but they're medicating themselves with food. And then when they work through the emotional issues in therapy or whatever modality they use, then their self-medication isn't needed as much. So I have worked with people who were bulimic or anorexic or whatever the case may be, who are not necessarily food addicts. Where it's different is the food addict can't stop once they eat certain things, and it's not necessarily. I'll give you an example. Somebody who's going through some kind of a depression or anxious, they may use food to self-medicate. They may either restrict and not eat because their appetite is down, or they may overeat because they're depressed and they're using that to comfort them. And when they get their depression treated, then there's not the same kind of need for that. But a food addict, no matter what tricks they try, they when it comes to certain substances, they keep breaking their own rules. So an example of a rule would be, I'm just going to have one, or I'm just going to allow myself to do this on the weekends. Eventually, you get into the cycle of complete and utter insanity if you are a food addict and you're consuming it. Think about it. I mean, if you're a Coke addict, you can't just have a half a line and be okay. And these diseases are progressive. And so it starts out that maybe, a couple of cookies, gives you a little bit of a buzz and self-medicates and whatnot. But if you're a food addict, it's going to eventually turn into sleeve, bags, enormous quantities of food where you eat until you can't fit anymore in your stomach. And then you digest a little bit. And as soon as there's room, you pick up the food again. That's the cycle I was in. I would wake up with a lot of resolve, like I'm not going to eat any sugar today. And then by 10 o'clock in the morning, I would have some. And then I was off and running and I couldn't stop. I could not stop. And it was, like I said before, it was hell. It was, I had so much shame. I felt like I'm just a bad person if anybody knew this about me. And I got really fat. So there was nothing to gain from it. What I needed to do was I needed to find other ways of managing my depression, and that would have been much healthier for me. But I got caught up in the cycle of the addiction, and boy, did I run with it.
Wow, that's great. That's wonderful. Let's see if there's any more questions. Zen is saying some people stop eating when they're depressed. Right.
There is that also. And it's individual. Like some people sleep all the time and don't sleep at all. And, that's where it's important for people to look at themselves as being individual bodies, unique bodies. There's no one diet that works for everybody. And by diet, I mean way of eating. And that with the help of professionals, whether it's a nutritionist or, a therapist, getting the support that you need in order to distinguish between what are your thoughts and what is the messaging that your body is doing, because they're two very, very different things.
I know you said you don't work with children, but, I do a summit called the Truth About Weight Loss Summit, and I just interviewed a specialist in childhood obesity, and they're saying that, kids really shouldn't have sugar. Like they're even saying now that no sugar, no should be given to kids up in at least until 2 years of age, because they know the potential for harm.
You're preaching to the choir, and this happens to be an issue that I'm very passionate about because I raised 2 kids in this crazy culture that we live in. And I was forever feeling like I was fighting against the messaging that they were receiving, which was these foods are part of fun. I remember I gave a presentation once to, and it was entitled Helping Your Kids to Eat Better. And what I did is I took a picture of a local major supermarket's flyer, and it happened to be, August when I did this presentation, and I turned to the page where it said healthy back to school meals. And it was in the sale flyer of the supermarket, it listed a whole bunch of things, including Lunchables. So what I did is I took some of these examples that they had on that page of healthy back to school eating, and I made a list of all of the ingredients. And at this presentation that I gave, I had up at the time, it was like there's I don't know, like a screen or whatever on the wall, and I had all of the ingredients, and I requested that the audience look at the ingredients and ask themselves, did this feel like a healthy lunch to them? Because I wanted to point out the insidiousness of marketing. And so the point that I'm trying to make is that the way that these foods are marketed to children drives me crazy. I feel like it's abuse. I feel like it's taking advantage. I feel like it's such a disservice. There is no child that needs a Pop-Tart. It's just not something that anybody needs. And if you look at the ingredients, you see that it's not real food anyway. So what I used to do with my kids when they were young and we were in the grocery store and they saw the shiny packages of, the kind of cereal or whatever that are right at kid level, eye level, and that was shiny and maybe had these cool little characters on it that kids like to relate to, they'd say, Mom, what about that? Can I get that? Because they were being drawn in by the color of the packaging. And I'd simply take the package and I'd say, I don't know, let's look at what's in it. And I'd read aloud the ingredients and I'd say, I don't think this is real food. So I wanted to educate them not to read nutrition labels, but to read ingredient lists. And I think that that's another thing that the food industry has done is they get people focused on the nutrition labels, but not necessarily on the ingredient list. And the ingredient list is really the truth about what it is that you're ingesting. And so if it's a bunch of things that I can't pronounce and doesn't come from Mother Nature, I don't eat it. And I just wanted, that's something that people can do for their kids is educate them a little bit about what is in the item that they're wanting, because the packaging can be very enticing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that's good for their body.
That's what I always say. If it comes from a plant, eat it. If it's manufactured in a plant, don't eat it. One of the doctors I interview frequently, Dr. Frank Sabatino, who's spent years working with addiction, says that food addiction is the only addiction that's is socially acceptable. You can just do it in front of everybody. Nobody cares. Nobody says anything,
And not only that, but there are many people that feel hurt if you don't eat what they're providing. And so it's tangled up with all sorts of needs on the part of the host and the hostess. And, I just feel like it's once you figure out what works best for your body, and that varies from person to person, you are entitled to only eat that food. Nobody should be telling you what to eat. You should be eating what works for you. All of us adults should be eating what works for our body. But I would ask people to really ask themselves, is this working for my body? Or is it just something that tastes good, I enjoy? Just do a deeper dive into it, but without any judgment. One of the things that I pride myself on in my practice is that I'm not interested in judging my clients at all. I don't profess to know all the answers to anything. I'm just there to help them on the journey of figuring out what's working in their life and what isn't, and how they can maybe make some changes that will enhance their happiness and their joy and their peace and their serenity.
Well, I think abstinence definitely enhances one's peace and serenity. So here's a comment from Roberta that I get almost every day in my group or as an email, a similar comment. Oh, wish my husband would cooperate. He's a big food addict. He refuses to eat anything I eat. He buys donuts, pies, cookies, ice cream, bread, chips, candies every week. It's all around me. I've lost 28 pounds, but I need 20 pounds more off. It's so hard. But why do the women put up with it? I mean, you wouldn't put up with him bringing another woman in. I mean, so this is what I just don't understand, because when I realized food addiction was a thing and I was an addict, I said, Charles, can't have this in the house. And at first he said, well, no, don't worry, I'll hide it. Well, we lived in a 1,000 square foot apartment. I found it. And then he said, okay, I'll just take it to work. I mean, there was no argument. And I cannot understand why a spouse would be like that if they love their spouse. I mean, I just don't understand it.
Right. Well, one of the reasons why that happens is because, as I said, I think that the person that is the food addict may feel some shame and some ambivalence about even asking it. When we ask for something with direct certainty, when we state something that we need and we want and we require, then we make sure that we get it. Okay, but it's the energy that we bring to the request that's also important. In terms of, like, I don't believe that most spouses want to sabotage their spouse's happiness. I don't believe that. I do believe that food is very confusing for people for many of the reasons that you and I have already spoken about, but also, like you said, it's just so culturally accepted. It's socially encouraged. We're getting messages nonstop. And so a lot of people have no idea the severity of how this impacts somebody's life. And so, for you and me, we're very fortunate that we live with spouses who are supportive and don't necessarily need to be food addicts themselves in order to support us. That's wonderful. I think that when we want to talk to somebody, when we want somebody to really listen to what we're saying, AJ, we have to talk to them in a way that they're willing to hear. And so that's where communication between spouses is so imperative. If we can say something to our partner in a way that they can hear, then they engage in the conversation more. And that's something that I help a lot of couples with too. If one person is having a hard time communicating what they need or want from their partner, I help as a little bit of a translator. And I will coach them about some of the language that they can use to try to make it so that their partner will engage in the conversation in a different way.
That's very helpful. You mentioned that when you became sugar and flour free over 32 years ago, you lost 40 pounds. Had you ever attempted to lose the weight before in other manners and were not successful?
Maybe 150 ways to try to, I mean, I was obsessed with getting thinner. I was obsessed with I wanted to lose weight more than I was in my 20s. It was very important to me. I had this idea in my head that I wasn't a valuable person unless I was thin. It was all of these things that were in conflict with one another. Here I was, a food addict, and derived, my comfort, my emotional comfort from food. Yet I was terrified of becoming obese. And so it was a constant war going back and forth between, my head saying, I absolutely, absolutely, absolutely want to be thinner and healthier. And my body saying, get me my next fix. I want sugar. I need sugar. It was nonstop. And it was so exhausting. I oftentimes will say to my clients who are food addicted, imagine how much time and energy you will have to work with when the food is in its good, healthy place. Imagine what that will free you up to do. Imagine the creativity that you can bring to the fore. Imagine the people that you can do good for. Imagine the travel that you can engage in. Imagine the productive work that you can participate in. If you're not obsessing about food all the time, if you're not running around trying to go from convenience store to convenience store, getting your drugs. I mean, this stuff takes up time. It uses up a lot of energy. And that energy gets taken from things that will give you much more pleasure. But it's a cycle. And I really, really have tremendous sympathy and empathy for people who are addicted to anything, whether it's gambling or whether it's drugs or whether it's food or whatever, or shopping. Addiction is serious, and we have to find ways of filling up our toolbox, our emotional toolbox. We have to fill that up with coping mechanisms that are much more productive than these substances that are being marketed to us all the time.
Diane, who's watching live, says this is perfect timing for this show with the holidays and everything, because I find that people are now in two camps. Those of us that remained abstinent through the holiday weekend that are feeling great and have the energy to exercise and sleep well and do things, and those that succumb to the temptation of sugar and flour and other treats that.
And you know, there's so many people, AJ, out there who are in tremendous agony right now because they maybe made a vow to themselves that they weren't going to binge on Thanksgiving, and they did anyway because they just couldn't withstand the temptation. And I feel tremendous compassion for them because that was me. And even though it was 32 years ago, I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember the hell of feeling all the shame that I had vowed, I'm not going to overeat, I'm not going to overeat. And then it took one bite of some substance, and all of a sudden I was off to the races and would eat until I couldn't stop. And then there's all the hiding, like I would be in a different room where the food was and everybody else would be in the other room talking, and I would just be shoving my face with food. So much pain attached to it. So I want to do a little shout out for you folks who are suffering today as a result of maybe a Thanksgiving not going the way that you want. And I want you to know absolutely that you can have the health and the wellness that I have been blessed with. But I don't believe that any of us can do it alone. I believe that it's something that we all need support around. And if you live with people who can be that support, wonderful. If you don't, then seek it out in friends, family, or a therapist, or whatever the case may be. Because we can't do it alone.
I agree. If they could have done it alone, they would have. That's why I have a group, you have groups, and there's so many places to get help. Do you think, Sarah, if you accidentally got some non-abstinent food, it would trigger you? And I don't mean like on purpose, but like there was one time where something had sugar and I didn't know, I was told it didn't. And I didn't go off the deep end, but I was like, God, I have so many cravings. I'm so snacky. And then it turned out that the almond milk they used, because the box looked the same. It was innocent, but I remember like, God, I've got so many cravings just from that little bit of sugar.
I think that may have happened like in the first year, but no, it wouldn't happen now, because to me, Chef, there's two options. I'm either abstinent or I'm going to die, because I know that if I started down that cycle again, it would kill me. It was such hell, and I was so powerless over these food substances, and there's no part of me that wants to go back to that. So no, I don't believe that if I, unbeknownst to me, got something, and I also want to say I am vigilant about what I eat. I mean that, I don't really chance it. I don't chance it. And it's not like I don't chance it like I feel like, oh my gosh, I'm a prisoner. It's to the contrary. It's something that doesn't work for my body, and it's something that I don't want in my body. And the extent to which I can control it and practice that self-care, you better believe I'm going to. So it probably, hasn't happened, but if it has, thank you, God, it didn't lead to any kind of a relapse for me. And I've just been really, really fortunate. But I also am very organized. I bring my food with me wherever I go, like I indicated before. And that planning and being planful is, to me, very self-respecting.
Yeah. Well, I know abstinence isn't for everyone, but for those that can embrace it, it works. And you may have to walk that road alone, but at least you won't be falling down.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that there's no food out there that is more delicious to me than abstinence. It just isn't. I don't miss any of that food. I do not miss any of it. I don't, at birthday parties, I don't miss that cake. I just don't. I treat myself like, if it's a birthday, I'll get some really cool, exotic fruit that I might not ordinarily get for myself. And I just feel like there's ways of treating yourself with food that don't have to do with self-harm.
Right. I love that. I wrote that down. I'm going to start quoting you. No food is more delicious than abstinence.
It's true. It really is. And I remember when I was in my insanity, I used to just pray. I would pray for, life over binging, because I saw binging as equating to death. And I really wanted to live, but it took me to wacky land. And I've been able to just be so free of that since. And it's been worth every bit of effort. And again, it really isn't effort anymore. It's the way that I live. The first 6 months maybe were challenging, but then it was just, and this is what I eat, and this is how I take care of myself.
Well, congratulations on 32 years of abstinence. See, a lot of abstinent group will say, well, now I'm going to bake you a cake. No, I'm not going to do that to congratulations.
No, it's just not part of my existence. But Chef AJ, I just wanted to remind people that if they would like the free gift that I'm offering, which is my top 25 alternatives to emotional eating, they just have to send me an email and I'll get that right to them. And also that I've got a bunch of classes and presentations and workshops, virtual ones coming up, and they can go on my website and click on upcoming events. And I would love to have people participate in it. There's a whole bunch of cool things that I'm offering.
I didn't put your email in the show notes, but I can add that. So I have everything else that you asked for. So I'll just say to email for free gift. Okay. That sounds good.
Questions that anybody has or any support that I can give to anybody?
I'm looking. And do you do any social, guys, I'll get you the email. You'll have to go to YouTube to find that in the show notes, but I'll add that as soon as I possibly can. And let's see, do you do any social media, or is there any other place for people to follow you?
My website is very informative and easy to navigate. I'm not interested in social media. I'm not. It may be my generation or whatever, but no, if people want to contact me, I am type A about getting back to people. So if they email me or if they go on my website and send me a message through that, I will get right back to people.
Great. I will add that to the show notes, because the link to your website and to the course is already there. So I just didn't put it in because I didn't think you'd want it. So I will add that as soon as possible.
Remind folks, I want to remind the listeners that if they for my What Am I Hungry For? I'm Not Really Hungry For course, by December 1st, they get 50% off.
Okay, so should I add that to the show notes too?
Please.
I will do that. Well, great. It's so great. It's so congratulations on 32 years of abstinence. I feel like getting, a zucchini and putting a candle in it for you.
Well, I appreciate you and all that you do. And I just want the folks out there to know that they can have this peace and serenity too. And just please don't ask yourselves to do it alone. It's too much.
Right. I love it that it's just really a reflection of self-care. I learned so much. It was a pleasure talking to you today, Sara. And thank you so much for coming on the show. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pacific time, where we have Small Business Sunday featuring the Thanksgiving and Cyber Monday specials of 12 small businesses with products that you would love to have. Happy Thanksgiving weekend, Sara. Take care.
You too. Thank you.